students, there were some calculation questions for ionic equations that I wanted to solve with you guys. Just not too many questions. Let's just talk about these questions, okay? These questions again deal with the two things we talked about just now, atoms versus ions, okay? So, I'm going to start with the first question. An ion of vanadium has the following subatomic particles. So they tell you it's an ion. So when they use the word ion, you know it's already stable. Okay. So 23 protons, 20 electrons. Write the formula for this ion. Now, the thing about atoms versus ions is that in atoms, you have your number of protons and number of electrons to be equal. In ions, though, this is not the case. The number of electrons will increase or decrease depending on the charge of the ion, but the protons will be the same. So in this case, there are 23 protons and 20 electrons. The number of protons are 3 more than the number of electrons. So the symbol or the formula for vanadium is V, which is the symbol for vanadium, and 3 plus. Why 3 plus? Because there are 3 more protons than electrons, meaning that it's more positive. Okay. If the question was sulfur, now let's take sulfur. Sulfur atom has 16 electrons. The proton number is 16. So 16 protons, 16 electrons. But 16 electrons. But if the question tells you that sulfur ion, which is sulfide, has 16 protons and 18 electrons, what does that mean? The number of electrons are more than the number of protons by 2. So you would have a formula of S2 minus. Okay, does that make sense, guys? All right, let's do some more questions. Atom M has a proton number of 20. So we first write down that it's an atom. It's M, proton number 20. Pn equals to 20. 2 electrons are removed from the atom. Will atom M form a positive ion or a negative ion? So think, 2 electrons are removed. So the number of protons are still 20. The number of electrons, though, are no longer 20. Since 2 are removed, the number of electrons are 18. So since the protons are more than the electrons, atom M will form a positive ion, guys. Now, the next question, what is the charge of the ion formed? Look at the difference between proton and electron. 20 minus 18 is 2. And since proton is more than electron, it's going to be positive. So the charge is M2 plus. Does that make sense, students? Now, write out the electron arrangement for the ion, not for the atom, but for the ion. Our ion has 18 electrons. So 2.8.8. The way to check if you're right is also to make sure the ion is stable. Let's look at the valence shell. There are 8 electrons. It's stable. So this is the electron arrangement for the ion. Okay, guys? Next question. An ion of element Y has the following particles. 35, and this they are saying is an ion, so we write down ion. Protons are 35, neutrons are 44, and electrons are 36. What is the formula of the ion? Now, students, for writing the formula of an ion, we don't care about the neutrons. So let's just forget about the neutrons. The protons are 35, the electrons are 36. And so the number of electrons are more by 1. So we have Y 1 minus. This is the formula. Okay, guys? Next question. An ion of silicon has a proton number of 14. So I'll just write down the word ion. Silicon, which is Si, and proton number is 14. The number of electrons in the ion exceeds the number of protons by 4. That means if the proton number is 14, the number of protons are 14. The number of electrons is also the same, but that is for the atom. We are talking now about ion, and it says the number of electrons in the ion exceeds the number of protons by 4. That means it's greater by 4. So 14 plus 4 is we have 18 electrons. Is this ion positively or negatively charged? Question 1. The number of electrons are more than the number of protons. So it is negatively charged. What is the charge of this ion? So think about it, guys. The number of electrons are 4 more than the number of protons. So the charge is Si4 minus. And write out the electron arrangement for this ion. We have 18 electrons, so the electron arrangement is 2.8.8. Okay, students? Now, next question. And this is basically to just differentiate between atoms and ions, okay, students? Ion X2 minus, ion, has an electron arrangement of 2.8.8. Determine the number of protons and electrons in ion X2 minus. So they want the protons and electrons in X2 minus. They've given us the electron arrangement. The electron arrangement of the ion gives us the number of electrons of the ion. So we have 2 plus 8 plus 8, which equals to 18 electrons. Now, how do we find the number of protons? Are the number of protons the same as the number of electrons? For an atom, yes, but for an ion, no. This ion is X2 minus, meaning it has in its atom form, it gained 2 electrons. So before it formed an ion, let's think about this. Before it formed an ion, it was an atom, and it had 16 protons and 16 electrons. This is as an atom. Only after forming an ion did it become X2 minus. It gained 2 electrons. That means the number of protons is going to be 16, because remember, in the atom form, number of protons equals number of electrons. So number of protons equals to 16. All right, guys, some more questions. Atom X has a proton number of 19 and a nuclear number of 39. It forms an ion with a formula of X, let's see, what is this? I can't see. X2 plus. Am I right? 2 plus? Okay. 1 second, guys. Let's see. Okay, sorry. It forms an ion with the formula X plus. So I'll reread the question. We have, let me write it on a new piece of paper. Atom X has a proton number of 19. So atom X, proton number of 19, meaning protons are 19, electrons are 19. And a nuclear number of 39, meaning neutrons are 39 minus 19, which are 20 neutrons. But we don't really care about neutrons. It forms an ion, so this atom becomes an ion with the formula X plus. Determine the number of protons. Now, and this is, we determine the number of protons, number of electrons, number of neutrons, and the electron arrangement for ion X plus. Guys, protons and neutrons will never change. So the number of protons in this ion is still going to be 19. The number of neutrons is still going to be 20. The only thing that changes is the number of electrons. Since it's X plus, the ion has lost 1 electron. So the number of electrons are 19 minus 1, which is 18. And the last question, the electron arrangement, has to do with the number of electrons. So 2.8.8. Alright guys, I hope you're able to see now the differences between atoms and ions. It's not too difficult. So, just a few more questions. 4 more questions guys, and then we are done. So, what is the charge of a lithium ion and an iodide ion? Okay, this is simple. So, lithium is group 1, right? We know the proton number is 3, so the electronic configuration is 2.1. Now, lithium atom, to become stable, loses an electron. Once it loses an electron, it becomes Li plus in this ion form. So, the charge of lithium ion is plus 1. What about for iodide? So, iodine, we don't know the electronic configuration, we don't know the proton number, but we know it's in group 17, meaning the valence shell will have 7 electrons. So, like fluorine, chlorine, bromine and iodine, what happens is they gain 1 electron to become stable, meaning they become I1 minus. So, the charge of iodide is 1 minus. Does that make sense guys? Awesome. Now, what is the charge of a barium ion and a phosphide ion? Now, barium is in group 2, just like calcium, meaning it has 2 valence electrons, okay? For it to become an ion, it should lose those 2 electrons, so it becomes Ba2 plus. So, the charge of barium is plus 2. Phosphide. Phosphide ion is from phosphorus. Phosphorus we know is in group 15. So, the proton number is 15, 2.8.5. For it to become stable, to become an ion, it needs to gain 3 electrons. So, it becomes P3 minus. The charge is minus 3. 2 more questions guys. Element X, one second. Element X has a proton number of 19. So, element, when they say the word element, it's not an ion, it's an atom. It's how it looks in the periodic table. Element X has a proton number of 19. Now, before I continue the question guys, these letters are not the actual symbols of the elements. But once you memorize the first 20 elements of the periodic table, you know automatically if the proton number is 19, this is actually potassium. Element Y has 6 valence electrons. 6 valence electrons meaning the last shell has 6 electrons. Now it could be any element, but let me think of an element with 6 valence electrons. So the first shell will have 2 electrons, the second shell has 6 electrons. What element can we think of? Oxygen guys, because oxygen has 6 valence electrons. So, deduce the formula for the compound formed between element X and Y. When you have a compound, what do you follow? You follow the ion form. So, potassium is in group 1, so it will be K plus. But in this case, we are talking about X, so X plus. Oxygen, when it becomes oxide, is O2 minus, but in this case we are talking about Y, so Y2 minus. We end up getting X2Y. So, do you see how easy this is actually guys, and how useful it is to know the first 20 elements? Alright guys, last question and we're done with this part. An ion in element R has 13 protons and 10 electrons. So, I'll write that down. Ion R has 13 protons and 10 electrons. So, automatically I know if the proton number is 13, if it has 13 protons, this is definitely aluminium. An atom of element T has 17 electrons. This is an atom, not an ion. So, T has 17 electrons. What atom has 17 electrons? Chlorine, of course. Give the formula of the ionic compound formed between R and T. So ionic compound basically formed between aluminium and chlorine, and then we will switch the alphabets later. Aluminium is Al3 plus, chlorine is Cl minus. We get AlCl3, which is equals to Rt3. So that's it, guys. You see the usefulness of knowing the periodic table in these kind of questions. All you need to know is the first 20, guys, and you'll be good to go. Thank you, and see you in the next video for covalent compounds.